Islam will continue to be triumphant until there have been 12 Khulafa, all of them from Al-Quraysh.
The God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed, nor shall the kingdom be left to another people. It shall break in pieces all these kingdoms and bring them to an end, and it shall stand forever.
This is my brother, my executor, and my successor among you, so listen to him and obey.
My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would have been fighting.
Whoso obeys me obeys God. Whoever disobeys me disobeys God. Whoever disobeys my commander disobeys me.
The Lord said to me, You are my son. Today I have begotten you. Ask of me, and I will make the nations your heritage, and the ends of the earth your possession.
Two systems of government, two visions for life on earth. Whichever is true changes everything. This is Christ and Khulafa.
So essentially, a woman named Mahsa Amini, was killed while she was arrested for not wearing her hijab
properly
in public. There are videos asserting, that she didn't die in police custody, that she had a stroke. That's the story. But what's more likely is that she was beaten in custody and released and had some kind of a episode, like a seizure or a blood clot or something like that. And that sparked a mass protest across the entire country. It spread all over. And they're saying that there are 76 dead, but I'm quite sure it's higher than that. They're saying it's 1,500 arrested and, all of these protests. Most of my news is coming from TikTok and Instagram. So watching videos that people are leaking out, right? Because there's a blanket of silence, right? The country of Iran has shut the internet down.
Well, now we're gonna get a very reliable source of news. We have our subject matter expert. So I didn't get this right once last time, but so today, thank you for joining us, Saghar Kasraie.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, it's as close as you're gonna get.
The only way I can do it is by like faking an Iranian accent for like a minute. Hey, you've got to imagine it in Persian characters.
I've heard much worse, so you did a good job. Thank you.
We've also been working with a lot of Hazara Afghans in the last year as well, which helps. So I've been getting more and more
exposure
with Persian names. So why don't you give us the overview of everything that's been happening in Iran over the last 2-3 weeks?
Yeah, so actually what really sparked everything that's happening in Iran started September 17, 18. A young Kurdish Iranian girl named Mahsa Amini was traveling for vacation to the north of Iran. On their way back to the Kurdistan region, they stopped in Tehran to visit family. Apparently, she was wearing tight leggings. Her leggings were too tight underneath her, what we call a manto, which is kind of a cover, like almost like almost like a long cardigan that's supposed to go to your knees or even longer to your ankles to avoid showing your curves or the woman's body. She was stopped by morality police. Now, in Iran, morality police are usually in the bigger cities, and they have morality police for boys and they have morality police for girls. She was stopped. She was with her brother, and she got really scared and started panicking and begging her brother not to let them take her. What they do is they round up the girls and they take them to it's a re-education sort of class that's supposed to be about an hour, where they teach you how to dress according to Islamic law. Now, because she's not used to being in the bigger city, she didn't, she wasn't prepared for that, I think. And so she really freaked out. I mean, she's 22 years old. She's a kid. And they put her in a van with a bunch of other girls. And right now, what we're hearing is that the girls in the van with her witnessed her being very afraid and begging and crying and asking to be, released. And she was beaten up inside this van by some of the guards that were there. They took her to the detention center. And I don't know if you've seen any of the footage, but there's a footage that the regime has actually put out there to try to show that she, she passed out at the detention center, but she was taken to the hospital from the detention center where she slipped into a coma, and she died 2 days later. Her death sparked, I think, the most unprecedented reaction from Iran after the death of Neda Sultan. She comes from the region of Kurdistan, so the outrage came during her funeral where she was buried. A lot of the community came together, and then eventually it just spread throughout the entire country. And the hashtag Mahsa Amini has exceeded over 100 million, has been used over 100 million times worldwide. People are now not just protesting Islamic law, they are protesting and demanding that Khamenei and the Islamic government resign. And they're asking the world to support them in their quest for freedom and democracy.
So what has the Iranian government response been to this so far?
Well, like it usually does, it cracks down pretty brutally. The protests are usually at night. They start around 6 o'clock every evening. Well, what they have done is they have slowed down or completely shut down the internet so that information can't get out to the free world. They have responded in shooting at protesters. We don't know the number of people that have died. We don't know the number of people that have been detained or arrested, but we do know from information that's coming out from our sources and networks inside Iran that many people have been physically assaulted. They're using pellet guns, like BB gun pellets, to shoot at protesters because, frankly, the eyes of the world are on them. And if they start shooting at everybody, it's going to be a bloodbath. But it really is a bloodbath, no matter how you look at the situation. They're cracking down pretty hard. And it's interesting because on the heels of the General Assembly at the United Nations, the president of Iran, Ebrahim Raisi, had the audacity to come during his speech and talk about Iran being the leader of justice in the Middle East and accusing the United States of being terrorists because they eliminated Qasem Soleimani. And at the same time, people in Iran were protesting in the streets saying death to Khamenei, death to the Islamic Republic. And we also saw how we're starting to see the Islamic Republic lobby groups around the world trying to sort of twist the story of where it's going. They're trying to imply that this is just about hijab. This is just about, forced hijab, that women are just wanting their rights to either cover or not. But this is so much bigger than hijab. This is about people wanting to finally be rid of an Islamic state. They don't want to live under an Islamic state. And what's remarkable is that, and today I saw a video that just made me cry. The theme of this movement, when people chanting woman, life, freedom, has been sort of the theme in the streets. Now, I saw medical students at one of the medical schools chanting. There were men and women together. The men were chanting woman, life, freedom, and the men were the women were responding to that chant, man, country, prosperity. So it's just this amazing display of gender equality side by side, where frankly, for the last 43 years, women, Islam and, religion has been used as a weapon to harm women. Now the men are standing up and rising up and standing next to the women to support this movement.
So with everything happening right now, I'm curious with your read. So last time we talked was at the death of Qasem Soleimani.
Yes.
And since then, there's been like lots of difficult things in Iran. There's been the government shot down its own aircraft. There's like awful. It was hit really hard by COVID at the beginning. Like how has that stuff affected like the strength of the position of the Iranian government in the years since then?
Well, because there was no accountability or any justice for those that perished in the Ukrainian airliner that was shot down, the Iranian regime has been emboldened. And the fact that the United States and Europe continues to want to return to the JCPOA, which is the basically the nuclear agreement. It's almost like nuclear blackmail. You give us money and we won't create produce a bomb. That's essentially what they're doing. And frankly, the way that the United States left Afghanistan showed a lot of weakness, and it emboldened people like Putin and the Islamic regime to continue not only to harming their own people, but to continue importing, Islamic terrorism across the region and in the region, whether it's, into Israel using Hamas and Hezbollah, or Syria and Iraq. I mean, today, as we speak, the people of Iraq are out there protesting against the Islamic Republic because the Islamic Republic has felt, hey, there's no consequence when I kill my own people. There's no consequence when I shoot down an airliner. Who's going to tell me what to do? So, unfortunately, there hasn't been any change in terms of, geopolitical change. It's gotten worse.
That's not what I was hoping to hear. I was hoping to hear, well, the Iranian government has been weakened by these things and how the people are stronger than ever. But, so you've got obviously
the people, it delegitimized the government with the people, and it has been delegitimate. I mean, you saw during the time when Qasem Soleimani was eliminated, people were celebrating all over the Middle East, right? I mean, that was pretty obvious. You can't just deny that. And frankly, I know people don't like to hear this, but Donald Trump forever became the hero of the Iranian people. They will never forget him because of that one act of having the courage to take out, the most notorious terrorists in the world. But unfortunately, because there was no follow through, and because the Biden administration has been chasing the regime down for a nuclear deal, they've used that as a means of, bringing more power to themselves. And they're being emboldened by China and Russia. When, you've got other bad actors supporting you that the world is afraid of, it doesn't really help the cause of them being weak, unfortunately. But I think the people of Iran are very capable of overthrowing this regime. And it's just a matter of time when that happens. At least that's what I believe will happen.
Okay, great segue, because that leads into my next question. What do you think it's going to take for the current government in Tehran to either fall or reform to an acceptable state?
The first thing that needs to happen is the free world needs to cut all diplomatic relationships with the Islamic Republic. End of story. That's the only way to do it. You cannot continue to give credibility to a regime that is willing to slaughter its own people and commit crimes against humanity only for the purpose of buying crude oil. That's not right. So that's the first thing that needs to happen. And I think the United States should be the first country that does that. Stop those conversations in Vienna. We're not having nuclear talks with you. End of story. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard is a terrorist organization. If you go into a nuclear, deal with this country, it is not going to help the Iranian people. It's going to hurt the Iranian people because you are giving billions of dollars to a country that spends that money on its nuclear capabilities, on funding terrorism, and exporting Islamic ideology across the world. I mean, that is the purpose of the Islamic Republic. That's the first thing that needs to happen, frankly. And the other thing I think that needs to happen is world leaders need to start talking to opposition leaders inside Iran. And there are opposition leaders. There is a movement to overthrow this regime. And I think that if the free world, we need some, look, Albania did it. Albania's government was the first country to cut diplomatic relationships with Iran because they found credible, they had an investigation where they saw that Iran was attacking them, they were using cyber attacks. Cut it off. And every other country that's doing business with them, cut it off. That's how you show the world your moral courage. And frankly, I don't see any right now, unfortunately.
So let's talk about, let's push back and explore this a little further here. So let's say when Gaddafi's government fell, that was kind of anarchy in Libya that hasn't recovered to this day. So if the government in Iran falls, what are the kind of worst case scenarios in the country, and what would you say the best case scenario is?
Okay, I have a question for you. I'm gonna a little question for your food for thought. Have you seen any looting in Iran during these protests?
Nope.
Not one single store or business has been destroyed. The only things that I have seen is symbols of what has been used as a weapon against the people has been destroyed. Friday mosques, Friday prayer centers have been burned. Pictures of Qasem Soleimani, Khamenei, and Khomeini have been burned. Statues of them has been burned. The Iranian people are civilized people, but I have seen a rage in them, and that rage is against the weaponization of Islam against them. Islam has been used as a weapon. The religion has been used as a weapon against the people, and the Iranian people are far wiser than the world. I personally think that people don't really understand. I know that there are leaders emerging within this movement, and if the free world could come alongside of them and help them to coordinate and to establish a revolutionary council that would take some sense of order in the transition between the now and the fall of the government, order can be, I think we can maintain order, but we need help from the international community. Some people say we don't need help, and I disagree with that. I think that there definitely needs to be support from the international community. We're not asking you to come into our country. We're asking you to come alongside of us and help support the people's quest for freedom. And I think that's what's important. We don't want anyone from the outside being planted as an opposition leader or as a leader. Nobody wants that. We don't want to prop up dictators. And I think the Iranian people for 43 years have been hoping and praying for that day to come.
So obviously we're talking about death, murder, evil governments, potential chaos here. But paint a picture of what the world could be like with a democratic, free Iran in the region. What do you think that would change about the world?
Well, first things first, we should get rid of our nuclear capabilities because that program is absolutely dangerous and unnecessary. Iran does not need nuclear capabilities. We have enough natural resources in Iran to maintain our energy. Okay, that first things first. The nuclear capability in Iran is a dangerous program that needs to go. That's the most important. A free and democratic Iran means a safe Israel, because that is really the whole focus of the Islamic Republic was to eliminate Israel. Being friends with Israel is a very important. I mean, Iranians love Israel. I don't know if you know this or not. Because they've been told to hate Israel for 43 years, they've done the exact opposite. And because they've been told to hate the United States, they've done the exact opposite. They love the United States. They love everything about America. They want to know what America is like. That's why everybody wants to come here. A free and democratic Iran, I think, establishes religious freedom, where Iran can go back to a place where Muslims, Jews, and Christians and religious minorities could live side by side without hate, without discrimination. It would eliminate really the chaos in the Middle East. Frankly, that's what I think. I don't know, maybe it's naive or maybe it's really idealistic to believe that'll happen, but I truly believe that the Iranian people are certainly capable of governing such a body.
So let's take the average. So there's a thing that governments can do, right? And let's say they all screw it up, which is probable outcome. What can the average Christian, what can the average American do? Well, what can even the average Muslim who hates what the Iranian regime is doing, what can the average person contribute to this situation?
That's a really good question. A lot of my friends and people in my network have asked me, what can I do? Well, first things first, you got to pray, because this isn't just, we're not just fighting against people. This is like evil ideology. This is like in the spiritual realm. It's, maybe this is crazy for, secular people, but against principalities, against evil that's above us. And so prayer, collectively praying for freedom and for democracy and for liberty, that's the first thing. Using the hashtag, if you're on social media, don't let this story die. Don't let this story get drowned by all the other things that are going on in the world. I mean, I get it. There's a war in Russia. There's a war in Ukraine. There's a hurricane coming towards us, and I get it. I get all that stuff. But if you're on social media, hashtag Mahsa Amini, hashtag Iran revolution, Iran protests, these hashtags keep the story going. I've also asked friends to make a video to send their support to the Iranian people. People like Justin Bieber, Ariana Grande, celebrities, artists, people who have wide networks, who have huge audiences could come out. Kim Kardashian, they've come out and they've, hashtag Mahsa Amini. All these people are coming out to show their support. That's how you keep the story going. And beyond that, if you are politically motivated, call your senator, call your congressman, tell them to not support the JCPOA, that we do not want to do business with an Islamic Republic that wants to export Islamic terrorism all over the world, that they are not going to be using the funding that comes from entering this deal to help their own people, to help infrastructure, to help their own economy. They're not going to do that. And if you're a world leader, then, that's that's where really what we need is world leadership. We need people who have moral backbones to call the regime out and to not negotiate with them.
So it seems like basically the thing that applies to absolutely everyone here is it's really important not to conflate the Iranian government with the Iranian people. That helping the Iranian government hurts the Iranian people.
Right. You don't want to empower the regime, because when you empower them, you make the people weak. And they're already delegitimate. They're already, not a legitimate government for the people. So when you empower the regime by buying their crude oil, you're letting them stay alive. It's like feeding them, feeding a monster. You gotta starve it from its power. The only reason the Islamic Republic has maintained power is because of the fact that they can sell crude oil to the world market. There is no other reason. The people of Iran do not believe in the Velayat-e-Faqih. They don't believe in the Islamic ideology anymore.
Any questions? Muted. I'm not muted.
You're not?
No.
Okay. I think we're going to go back and we're going to talk about, there's two elephants in the room, in my opinion, and you just talked about one of them. One of them is the oil, right? The massive power that oil dollars have and the amount of influence it has. When, for instance, when the United States, banned Saddam Hussein from selling oil, there was a lot of oil still flowing, right? What do you think the likelihood is of other countries getting behind that? Seeing with what we're really looking at globally is kind of like an energy crisis, right? You can see what's happening in Europe with Russia, withholding natural gas exports and things like that, and the United States ramping down its production, and honestly, the entire world kind of looking at the Middle East for a solution to fuel prices and stuff like that. I mean, I want to believe, right, that the world will step up and do the right thing. The cynical side of me watched what happened in Iraq, and how deals were done under the table, and honestly, it was like sickening to me personally, because it was countries like France, right? Like it was countries that are supposed to be bastions of democracy. So how do you think that plays out in real time, right? Like we don't want them, we don't want to buy their oil. We don't want to do that, but how do you think you could like gather a coalition of countries to really kind of put that down?
I mean, it's really simple. Do you want a free democratic Iran with normal, sane human beings selling you crude oil? Or do you want terrorists selling you crude oil? Right. I mean, that's really the solution here. I mean, in my logic tells me I would rather buy crude oil from a sane, free, democratic Iran. So world leaders need to come alongside of the Iranian people and support their quest for a free and democratic Iran. Otherwise, they're going to be blackmailed forever. It's nuclear blackmail. I don't understand how it's not an easy decision.
Right. I mean, I think markets are driven by stability. And I think that if you're able to, explain what you just explained, right? The idea that a sane Iran is a stable Iran, and it helps everybody. Rising tide lifts all boats.
I mean, I'm not an expert, right? I certainly, this is not my lane. However, those people that are in the positions to make those decisions, those high level positions, if those people haven't come to those terms, then really we should all be really concerned about who's leading us in the world. whether you're living in Europe or whether you're living in the United States. I would have much have rather seen a stable Afghanistan than the Afghanistan we have now, where girls cannot go to school anymore, where girls cannot be seen anymore. That to me is just absolutely insanity. But I think we're increasingly going towards a more chaotic, I mean, you know, as a Christian, I think we're moving towards a very strange and prophetic time, and none of this should surprise us.
Right.
Well, at the rate Christianity is growing in Iran, we could have a very unstable America and a very stable Iran 50 years from now.
That's true.
Yeah.
But who knows? I wish I had a crystal ball and I could tell you. I don't know. But I know that Christians inside Iran are supportive of what's happening on the ground. Even Christians that are Iranian Christian networks outside of, you know, in the beginning, some had come out and said, you know, as Christians, we shouldn't have an opinion, or we shouldn't, you know, talk about this. But we had some leaders, again, we had some Christian leaders emerge and say, we have to stand for the oppressed. That we are called to stand for the oppressed. So it's good to see the camaraderie among the Iranian Christian community, which has been kind of fractured, but the solidarity among the Iranian American community, or the Iranian community as a whole, the diaspora across the world, has been a beautiful thing for me to see.
You just gave me an entire new idea for a podcast episode. I really hope I can get Mansour to do it. So I know we said 30 minutes. So thank you.
Oh, no problem. This is kind of like my, you know, my heart. So it doesn't bother me. I didn't even see the time.
Can I just ask you one more question?
Of course.
Before we let you go. If we want to find like news that isn't being filtered, right? So when I look through, and I mean, all the news in America is filtered. And when we look on social media, all the news is filtered. Do you have like a place where you can point people to where they can get, you know, kind of real-time stories? I've been looking on Instagram and TikTok. I mean, that's where it seems like people are bouncing things off of VPNs. But if you have anything, you know, where do you think we should go to find the truth?
So if you're on Instagram, there are a couple of channels that are really good for, you know, up-to-date information about the protests. One of them is called 1500 Tasvir, which is 1500 TASVIR. Tasvir in Farsi is seen, or, you know, yeah, seen. So basically, like, you know, anyway, 1500 Tasvir is a really great channel. Another one is alijavanmardi.official. It's ALIJAVANMARDI.official. These are channels that you can, I mean, you can see post video. I mean, these are up to date by the hour. Sometimes they're in English, sometimes they're not, but you can always hit that little translate button and get translated. You could also follow me. I'm trying as best as I can to update my followers about what's going on. You can follow me on Twitter. Iran Wire on Twitter is a really great place. They're always posting, you know, content that's up to date content. We have a rising leader. His name is Ali Karimi. He's a former professional soccer player who's he's kind of emerging as the leader of this movement. He is Ali Karimi 8, ALI, and then Karimi is KARIMI. I'm not on TikTok, so I wouldn't be able to tell you. It's a little bit past me. It's not my generation. Maybe if I was 10 years younger. But yeah, I mean, there's unfortunately, you know, the mainstream media isn't going to show you what's going on. But social media is a great tool. It has been the only way that the Iranian people can get information out. So
What's your Twitter handle?
it's Saghar Kasraie. It's SAGHARKASRAIE.
Thank you.
I'll post all these in the comments, in the sort of description of the video.
Sure.
I guess one more thing that I forgot to ask earlier is we have this kind of government of Iran, people of Iran, but as far as people who are kind of running Iran now, is that monolithic, or could there be some righteous people in the government that could kind of stand in the gap here and help the Iranian people?
Well, that's a really good point, because we do have some people that are jumping ship. We've had police officers who have, I posted a video of a police officer who basically, with a blurred face come out and said, I'm not going to shoot my people. And he basically made a call to his comrades and said, join the people. So you're going to start seeing defections. There was I think it was like a city councilman who came out in support of the people, and the Minister of Intelligence called him and threatened him. And he said, I don't care. Come get me. I can't, you have a sister, you have a daughter. It could have been your daughter. It could have been my daughter. I can't support what you guys are doing. So you're going to see that. And that's how revolutions start, is when people start jumping ship. And that's really what I hope. And I think that's what it's going to take, frankly, is when you have officials looking. I mean, we right now we have celebrities, we have athletes, we have people who have resigned. We had a young lady from our handball team that resigned from the team. We have people within society that are coming out and saying, I can't stay quiet. So the good people are going, like I said, it's in these moments where leaders emerge.
Go ahead.
So that's really encouraging for me, because I think having that sort of during the Reformation, there's this doctrine developed called the doctrine of the lesser magistrates, and the idea is biblically God has handed the sword to the government, but that's not the same as the sword being handed entirely to the highest person in the government, and that if you're a believer, or if you want to stand in place of righteousness and justice, because not a government doesn't have to be like a believing government to do justice,
right?
But those lesser people then obligated to stand in the way of the evil coming from the top and represent the people's interest and the interest of justice. And if you have that, then it's much easier for Christians to get behind those people rather than just joining with a mob.
Right, exactly. Did you have a question, young lady?
Yes. I've heard a lot. This is probably a little bit of a different angle, but we've talked a lot about governments and weapons and religion. But a point that would be nice to touch on is like how this might be like a women's problem, and like, because a lot of women in United States and in all other countries are also trying to say that. And I'm glad that you talked about like how men have stood in solidarity, but there's a lot of people saying that this is a women's problem, imposed by men.
I see.
All like, not just like, we've talked about the specific factors in Iran, and people are saying this is a world. Like, people are saying, this is the same issue that women are having.
Patriarchy.
Patriarchy, and this is like the same. We're fighting the same evil that women seeking for their right to have abortions are fighting. People are saying it's the same issue, and I am curious maybe what your opinion on that is.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of feminists in this country are trying to twist that story, and trying to make it a woman's issue as opposed to a the issue of freedom. You know, it's interesting. I was in a seminar this morning where we discussed this issue. You know, in America, I don't think women in America have any understanding or any context of what not being free looks like, and being forced to practice a religion, or not having the choice to have any freedom of religion, right? In the Middle East, in Islamic countries, religion is used as a weapon to harm women. And women in this country, in America, don't understand that. They have no context. They've never lived outside of America to understand that. In terms of, you know, in terms of abortion, you know, every life is of value. Every life is of value. And bodily autonomy doesn't give you the right to harm another body, to harm another person. So that's a separate, you know, you can't mix those two things together.
Yeah, that's one thing that's happening. And because at the end of the day, these are all stories about men killing women, right? And so like I do see a lot of opinions, you know, even from like you've got Mexico, you've got Central America, you've got like the feminist movement. Like I'm just, yeah, I think that would probably be a longer topic, but.
Well, the thing is, you know, in Iran, the reason that the women are rising, the reason why this sort of was sparked by a woman and a woman's movement, where women are burning their headscarves and cutting their hair, you know, this is just it's kind of like a symbol of defiance. It's like, whoa, you don't want my hair, too much of my hair showing is a problem for you. Well, let me cut it off. You know, let me get rid of it. But and it's because women have had the shorter end of the stick living in Iran. You know, women are the, you know, sexual abuse is a weapon, right? But don't forget that men are dying too. You know, we had Navid Afkari, a beloved, you know, wrestler who was executed by this regime because of wanting to be free. So this isn't just about women. This is about men too. Men and women are now side by side fighting for the same cause. This isn't just a woman's movement. This is a human rights movement. This is a movement to for liberty, you know. And if people in America, I mean, frankly, I see our rights being taken away during COVID. I mean, I thought the world was coming to an end. I'm like, have you people lost your mind? You know, your rights are slowly but surely being taken from you I saw it during COVID. I was told where to stand in the grocery store, for God's sakes. Right. So I don't know. I don't think America really has any context of what not having freedom looks like. And maybe we had a little bit of it during COVID, but yeah, it's a long and complicated conversation, probably for another day.
No, I appreciate
one thing I experience a lot with when people come from the Middle East. I can't tell you how many people who are from like Saudi, Iran, Syria, places like this, and back home they would proudly call themselves a feminist. But then they move to America and they're like, what the heck are you people talking about?
Right.
Like like to conflate all these issues into, you know, like one thing.
And perhaps they do it for the sake of unity. Like there's nothing they have no other way of creating this mass unity, and they make it up on these conflating all of these very complicated issues.
Yeah. And I think the conversation with that for later becomes, does that help or does that hurt? Whereas maybe breaking the issues down into sort of smaller digestible issues may be more useful. Well, Saghar, I feel like I'm getting better.
That one was really good. I think you nailed it.
Thank you so much for all the work you do. Thank you for joining us and sharing your heart for your motherland with us. And we wish you all the best in that.
Thank you for keeping this conversation going. I mean, I'm grateful for any opportunity or any platform to be able to tell the truth.
Thank you. We'll see you next time.
Next time. Hopefully we'll have, the next time I see you, it's because we're celebrating a free and democratic Iran.
Coffee in Tehran.
Qahwe dar Tehran. Yes, I love it.
All right, thanks. We'll see you next time.
God bless you. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye.
Bye.
So Anonymous is against the Iranian government now.
Yes.
So in a twist of fate, the jihadis are now being attacked by the 72 virgins.
Oh my gosh. That's I can't go on. Thank you for joining us today.
So let's pick off where we kind of like left off on this sort of global unity over issues versus like dealing with specific problems.
Okay.
So I think, what do you guys think the good things about trying to kind of connect all these issues globally is, and what do you think the pitfalls of the issue are?
I'll let you go first. I mean, not let you, but I'm formulating.
Maybe one of the good things about Unitarianism around all this, potentially like a further examination of the specific tendencies of like men and women and like the specific evils, kind of a further examination of that is universal, you know, throughout history, throughout time, throughout countries and nations. Yes, like there is a trend. And what, then the pitfalls? You do the pitfalls.
I mean, we were just talking about it right before we came back from the break. I think that people are going to co-opt this. I think it's just really easy to sit there and say it has to fit my narrative, right? So, people equivocating abortion rights to what's going on over there. Whether or not that's legitimate is a different story, but what's happening is people are just trying to say, well, let's use this as a way to denigrate Republican support, for instance, right? Mm-hmm. If you're a Republican and you're a Republican legislator and you want to support the people of Iran, and people are going to turn around and go, well, you're not even for abortion, right? Like that kind of narrative it's co-opting the narrative, because as we can see, if I'm on Twitter right now and I'm watching all of this stuff happening, mm-hmm. This is a very different story, right? This is even if you are for abortion, this is so much more oppressive than any discussion we're having here in the United States about whether or not people have freedom. And I think politically speaking, if we're going to step away from the effect that it has on women, right, and the discussions we have here and there about what's going on, this is turning into like a political, hey, Biden's doing a great job because he's staying out of it, right? He's letting Iranians handle Iranian problems, but meanwhile we're watching things devolve into chaos. I think when we were talking to our guest, I had mentioned like an elephant in the room regarding oil. The other elephant in the room is America, right? America is not leading anything anymore. And like she said, it's created this power vacuum where we don't have one official in our government like who's forcibly saying, this is awful. We encourage the people of Iran to stand up for their rights, universal basic human rights, right? So I think what could happen here, the pitfall side, is just a politicizing of it that makes it useless.
Like, I wonder what would happen if instead of like, okay, us American women in the United States saying, oh, the women in Iran are going through the same exact issues that we are, and they want to say it's not a religious issue, therefore they're just trying to like, okay, we're not even going to talk about religion. What if people, instead of saying, trying to filter and trying to make it one common issue, which it's not, people should look into religion, should look into government and history, and they should actually start paying attention to those things instead of just saying we're all fighting for the same rights, because they're not the same. And that's something that people don't want to hear. But I wonder what would happen if we expanded our minds a little bit more.
So here's what I'm seeing here. The pitfall of connecting women's rights in America to women's rights in Iran to women's rights in Mexico is it tends to be centering everyone around your specific orbit, right? So for the woman in America who's protesting for like the right to have an abortion, then what's her whole good evil arc is, okay, vote blue this November, and therefore they connect everything else happening in the world into their little world, which essentially puts the sort of liberal American culture at the center of the world's culture, which is something people claim they don't want to be doing, but that's what they
are doing,
de facto are doing. So the question we need to be thinking about as what we think about this as Christians on a whole level is that people's rights are gifts from God, which means that we for sure see suffering around the world as connected, because all suffering comes from the world being fallen, all suffering comes from people being sinful, and all people needing to be reconciled to God and to live in conformity with what he says good is. But as that works itself out in different contexts, that what you're going to find is, well, in Mexico, you have a very different issue connected to sin nature, with domestic violence and the government having no accountability on that, to what you have in Iran, which for sure is still, yes, it's male violence against women, but it's more than that, because it's a belief system that puts people in a specific position who are
similarities, but yeah.
Similarities, but you're going to have women actively advocating for a systematized idea that's connected to that if this woman doesn't dress this way, then she's destabilizing the Islamic regime in Iran, and she'll bring shame on our society, and God will judge us. My guess is the average, Mexican drug dealer who beats his mistress to death is not thinking about things that systematically. Maybe I'm wrong.
No, but for sure, religion plays a big role into the assumptions. I think into the assumptions that societies are molded into.
Mm-hmm.
Like Catholicism, right? Sure, it maybe doesn't outwardly, or it does, but let's just say it doesn't outwardly dictate how women should dress. How it's operated throughout history does have those. So sure, sometimes you're arguing implicitly versus explicitly. But yeah, and I don't know. Yeah.
No, that's a really good point. So here's my...
But I think that people should dive into these issues instead of putting them aside and saying, no, we're all dealing with one big overarching problem. That's so lazy. It's not, it doesn't do people justice.
Yeah, absolutely. And here's why people should dive in. Because in reality, either people's rights are given to them by God, or they don't exist. Because, and what I mean by that is not that secular people don't care about people's well-being. What I'm saying about that is, it like, if the world we live in is just the visible world, there is no spirit, there is no transcendent nature to humanity, then all that exists is the physical.
Sacredness.
Right, there's no sacredness. Then rights are simply a human construct. And that's all based on preference. It's not based on any absolute laws. It's all based on what people prefer, what people think is going to lead to the most thriving.
Yeah.
And in order to enforce those, you need power. Everything becomes power. It requires power to be able to establish your vision of the world. And power has lots of problems that are connected with that. So if your rights are imaginary, do what you want. But then right now, the people in charge are doing what they want.
Yeah.
And you don't have a moral argument to make against what they're doing. No. But if there are real rights, it doesn't matter how powerful someone else is. We always have ground to stand on to say, no, this is someone's God-given rights. They're made in the image of God, and you can't violate this. So let's transition from that to more of the sort of nitty-gritty here. So somebody listening to us may say, okay, well, the problem in Iran is this hyper-religious government. And what you're saying is Jesus is the solution to these things.
Correct.
That sounds like more religion in government, you Christian ayatollahs. How dare you suggest such an outrageous thing? What do we say to that?
Man, I think a lot of these discussions that kind of try to impose, like, well, all right, you're just a bunch of Christian mullahs, right? Like you're just a bunch of Christian extremists and you want this. I mean, you really have to get into the text of the Bible and what it says. Don't listen to me.
Yeah.
I'm a human being. I'm fallible. You can go into the Word of God and it speaks for itself. I mean, God totally speaks for himself. He doesn't need me to defend him. And he doesn't need me to impose his will, right? This is, if he wants, I mean, I believe if he wants something to happen, it's going to happen. And because in his character, he acts out of love and grace towards us, that he's not like malevolent, right? Like he's not trying to be like I'm going to be a dictator, like these dictators that you're seeing in the Middle East, or that kind of thing. I mean, really simply, it says in the book of Romans, where the Spirit of the Lord is, there freedom is also. And in other translations, it says liberty, right? This idea that, God wants human beings to be free. And the way that we can achieve our highest level of freedom is by having his Spirit living inside of us every day, right? And it's not just freedom from political systems. And it's not just freedom from governments. It's not just freedom from, it's freedom from this part of ourselves that, can be self-destructive, is sinful, right? Yeah. And I'm looking at these mullahs here, right? For instance, on some of this stuff, and because of my background and some of the training that I wanted to undergo, because I thought that I wanted to be an imam, right? That in a certain, in an alternate universe, right? I'm one of these guys yelling at the girls. By the way, I brought my hijab here for you to wear during this. In an alternate universe, I'm that guy, right? But it's only because where the Spirit of the Lord came into my life, the Spirit of, Yeshua, Isa, Jesus, however you want to address him, coming into my life and changing my life is the reason why I even know what freedom is in the first place. Yeah. Right? Because to me, and from a certain point of view, to, quote an Obi-Wan line, you could totally look at this and say, well, he's just trying to do what's right for them, according to what the Quran says, right? So let's, according to what their religion says, according to, whatever. And the rest of us are morally outraged because we have a different worldview. But the truth of it is that could be any one of us. right? We could all be in a flip universe, right? Where society has evolved to where it is now, where it's like the Amazon women are in control, right? Nice. Women are capable of it too, right? We're all capable of being domineering. We're all capable of doing this. And the thing that liberates us from that oppressive nature of just being humans, right? And our need to subjugate things is the Spirit of God. Does that make sense?
Does make sense. And to put your abstract speech into like practical, like you had brought up the passage in the Bible that says that women should cover themselves, right? In the Bible. And so let's talk about that.
Yeah, okay. This is a very good discussion point. So
simple.
So let's say if somebody reads 1 Corinthians 11, talks about women covering their heads, and so therefore, if Christians get power, it's Gilead from A Handmaid's Tale. Women are covering their heads. It's just the same as Iran. There's not any difference. Or and say a Muslim objection to this conversation from certain like Muslims. We obviously don't want to put all Muslims with the government of Iran or even with the same opinion. Just talk to 3 different Muslims, you get 3 different opinions very quickly. But some people are going to say, well, the Bible says women need to wear hijab as well. Look at 1 Corinthians 11. Mm-hmm. What do we do with that? Mm-hmm. In an ideal Christian society, would women be wearing hijabs all the time? And would the government be enforcing it?
Well, my first thought on that is I think it's fundamental to understand that the scripture is supposed to be read and applied to every generation that it's in, right? So for us to sit here and say that, the only way to truly observe Christianity is to do it the way that it was done, 2,000 years ago, and then apply, 5,770 something years of Jewish influence on it. But the truth of it is, the scriptures are supposed to be read in every generation, they pass down to every generation, and they apply to every generation. But not every particular thing in the scripture is specifically like, we're going to nail our entire salvation experience on this one commandment, right? So we can see now, particularly in a place like Acts 15, okay, where the Gentiles receive the Holy Spirit. Peter goes and visits a bunch of Gentiles. He's Jewish. Holy Spirit falls on him. That was a change. That was a curveball. They didn't see that coming. They thought they had a firm understanding of how God works and the way he does things. And here we are with a completely different paradigm for them to sort out. And there's room in God's economy, in God's kingdom, to be able to look at the things that are going on around us and say, you know what? In this generation, not a great idea. Why did they wear the head coverings in the first place? Well, because taking your head covering off and, doing yourself up in that particular society in the first century is an expression of, your household wealth. It's status, right? It's giving you, it's the difference between being just a nobody and being a Kardashian, right? Just only the elite did that. So what Paul is saying in that passage is the reason why you ought to cover your heads is because uncovering your head is giving you, this fake moral high ground to be able to judge others. James is doing the same thing, right? So we look in the book of James, he does the same thing, and he says, if you're rich, you ought to humble yourself, right? This is a problem. This is a first century problem. It's also an us problem. Okay, this is something we look at now, where there's elites and they have money and they kind of look down on the unwashed masses. And this has been a problem throughout history. So the point isn't...
So you're talking about preservation. You're talking about self-preservation.
Yeah, I think that the thing that... Well, how so? Explain that.
Because you're, whoever was wearing the head covering would be preserving kind of their image.
Yeah.
In the face of the society.
I think it's a question of kind of what are you communicating? And so the rationale in 1 Corinthians 11 and it's very important to note there's the difference in 1 Corinthians 11 than the sort of traditional Islamic rationale for this, is the head coverings in Islam are about modesty to like avert, to protect you from like men's gazes primarily. Yeah. In Corinth, it's about it's about showing the distinctives between men and women, and nowhere in the Bible does it actually use modesty in the sense of you're averting people's gazes. It's exactly what Ibaz is saying: is don't let you dress modestly, not skip bikinis and swimsuits, but don't wear braided hair and gold and costly attire to church, or at least don't let that be your identity.
Right.
And if the admonition in 1 Timothy 2 is, well, don't let your adorning be like your braided hair, what does that show you? The people going to church in Ephesus are not covering their heads. That's a Corinth thing. Mm-hmm. In the New Testament, we see eternal principles applied in different contexts, lots of ways.
That's great. So true.
So if you were to summarize, we're summarizing the interpretation, right, of that passage specifically. That's like the first part. And then the second part is, okay, what would it look like? You said, should it be enforced by the government? Should it not? I think even the fact, like if we look back at the story, it's the morality police that detained her. And like, as Christians, right, there's a difference between civil law, moral law, and who enforces that. Mm-hmm. And so like, what I would say is that even if everybody interpreted the passage in Corinthians the way it should be interpreted, given the context, and then that still doesn't give, that's still a moral issue that the government or police or people with guns don't necessarily get to engage in.
Right.
That's precisely what's happening in Iran.
That's what's happening there, yeah. And yes, I would say that Islam would not provide that, and why I say that as Americans, men and women, we should look into the texts is because perhaps Islam does not provide a framework where you can have the separation of powers, and perhaps the Bible does provide a framework where you can have that separation of power, and that whether or not you're wearing a head covering or not, that is a moral decision, and it's like personal to families and individuals, and how you see your faithfulness to God personally, not at a state level, not at a government level.
Right. So the worldview of the Islamic Revolution in Iran has an absolute conflation of church and state. So when Ibaz becomes the Ayatollah of Washington State, it doesn't. If Christians are in power, they should not be using the power of the state to bring moral conformity to the Christian life. Even in Old Testament theocratic Israel, with the literal voice of God speaking from the Ark of the Covenant in the tabernacle or the temple, it still wasn't the job of the government to go around making sure everyone was acting perfectly moral all the time.
Mm-hmm. The individuals, we can see as thematically, particularly for more egregious sins, are held accountable by God himself. And that goes all the way up into the New Testament, right? Like, you can see what happened to Herod. You can see what happened to Ananias and Sapphira in the book of Acts. I think the thing that really gets lost in this discussion is, the truth is God looks on the heart, right? So what is the purpose of, let's say, any moral infraction? And how does God look at it? Mm-hmm. I think what we're doing, as human beings, is looking at, the things that God said and saying, let's use them as a standard for judgment, which we rightly should. The thing that God is able to do beyond our limited sense of focus is look at where the person's heart is. So, For instance, when I met Messiah, right? When I met Jesus for the first time, I was in a place where I didn't believe in him, and I absolutely wanted to go study to be an imam, right? And I was coming also out of like a life of crime, right? Like, and God looked at my heart, right, and saw my intentions. Honestly, I think deep down inside, I wanted to end that, unrighteousness in my life. And I was looking for a way to do it. And the way that God reached down in my life was show me the way that it's actually done, right? By introducing me to his son and allowing him to come into my heart and change me. So, I think the thing that gets lost in all of this is when you're a moral police, right? Mm-hmm. You're looking at a set of rules, and you're not capable of exercising God's grace without having God's Spirit living inside of you. And, you're lacking the wisdom and the context to be able to sit there and say, hey, look, there are rules, right? There are rules that we should all keep as a society, but I don't divorce myself from loving you as a human being, right? So I think let's just take the illustration to a different place. Let's say we're all going to church one day, right? And a woman comes in and she's wearing a bikini in church, right? Why would we ask her to do anything differently, right? Well, is it inappropriate? Sure, it's socially inappropriate to come into a church with all of those things. Should I grab a Bible and throw it at her? Should I rip up some of the carpet and try and cover her up, or like,
right.
You know what I mean? Do I resort to violence? Do I
No.
resort to any of those things? The truth is, the advocate that we have in between each other, and this is why the handmaiden's tale in healthy Christianity never happens, is because the Holy Spirit is at work in the lives of believers. And if he is truly leading us into love, right? Loving our neighbor as we love ourselves, like it says in the book of Deuteronomy, and Jesus quotes it again in the Gospels in Matthew. This idea of having an advocate between us, right? If I sit there and I judge you or I judge you, right? Wrongly, God comes back at me, man. Like, he convicts me that I'm doing the wrong thing.
Yeah.
And he puts me in a position where I feel uncomfortable. I feel like I've sinned and I need to make it right. So in environments like, we talk about what's happening now, this is an environment, what's happening in Iran, this religious, theocracy, this bullying, this murder and death that's happening, it's happening devoid of that kind of advocate between us.
And the religious branch of the sort of Jewish state or the Israeli state in the Old Testament is the priesthood. And what's the priesthood's goal? The priesthood is not to go around condemning people. The priesthood is to teach, to express God's mercy, and to facilitate sacrifice and proclaim God's forgiveness.
Worship.
To people, right? It's not there to go around bring this moral conformity. It's to actually bring people this way back to God.
Sure.
It's not this, all right, where are your sacrifices? Pay the priest or go to jail. It's, yeah, you're screwed up. You need help. And you voluntarily bring sacrifices to the priestly system.
Good point.
And so, as Christians, as a nation of priests, we're there to be that agent of teaching and mercy, not an agent of the sword to go and bend people into moral conformity using force.
Right. The only time I can really think of when there was like God is directly dealing with them through their brothers was when they worshiped the golden calf. Right? And it was pretty much just taken upon themselves by the sons of Levi to go out and just, this plague is spreading through our people, and it's happening because of this egregious sin that's happening in God's sight. So let's do that ourselves.
What are you referencing when you say let's do that ourselves?
They went and killed everybody who was fornicating.
The army, the
Not the military, the priests.
The priests.
Gotcha.
But they were actually, the sons of Levi were not priests at that point. They were appointed to be
They were just regular citizens.
And
They were, yeah.
And I think
They were a tribe.
There's one really important nuance to like point out here. We are not secular humanists who don't believe in punishment and judgment or anything like that.
Right.
But that belongs to God. So one big difference between what's happening in like Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy is you literally have God hovering over them as a cloud.
Right.
And you cannot offend God's presence with sin. And that's still true, but judgment is delayed. So, therefore, as individual Christians, as the church, we're only to be agents of mercy. It's not to say there's no judgment. It's not to say there's no standard.
Yeah.
But we're there to help people mercifully return to that standard. And then God has given the state to punish necessary evils for keeping society in order.
I like that response. If somebody came and asked you, James, you want to have a Christian government? Are you just gonna, they'll look at the Bible, they'll say, are you just gonna stone women for committing adultery? Right? Like, the answer is no. But, like, I think people are looking for how we're justifying that no.
I think it's also very convenient that they will look at the idea of Christianity, right, and go right to the parts of it that seem the most egregious, right, and misapply them. You know, like what are you gonna do? You're gonna stone people?
Well, because that's what perhaps.
Well, because that's what happens in churches every day, right? Like when you don't come and bring your offering, the pastor's there with a big brick.
Right.
Well, here's where I think this becomes funny, because I think if you talk to a lot of women who are alive today and said, how would you feel about stoning men who cheat on their wives? I'd be like,
let's do it.
Yeah. So part of the problem is when this is all kind of like applied to one gender, which it often is throughout history, that you have a girls must be the height of purity and boys will be boys type attitude, and that's completely unbiblical.
Right.
So there's this instance in the New Testament where they bring a woman who's committed adultery to Jesus, but who's missing? The man who's taken part in this as well. Mm-hmm. By the strictest interpretation of the Old Testament law, both of them should have been there. So Jesus, who is God, as he interprets the law, he shows mercy in that instance. And so what we don't want to do is say, oh yeah, adultery is not a big deal. It's a huge deal. It's an earth-shattering, life-shattering problem that actually deserves immense punishment and judgment from God. Mm-hmm. But
not from a Christian state.
Not from a Christian state. Not from the state. That's not why we're here. We're here to be agents of mercy and say, look, here's the way back for your family. Here's the way back for your life. Here's how to rebuild the ruins of the life you've created.
And God also does that. He holds the power to condemn as well as to bring back and make better.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's the kind of thing that...
But perhaps we're not seeing that. People say, oh, you just want to replace the religion. And it's not that simple.
No, it's not, because everyone's going to be enforcing a religion. So let's go to France, for example.
Yeah.
Because Iran says you have to wear a head covering. France says you cannot wear a burqa, like the thing that covers everything but your eyes. And in schools, you can't wear any symbols of religion at all. Why? To promote secularism.
Which is another religion. Secularism is a religion. Just putting that out there.
It's a worldview with value. So there's no way you can't... You're always going to be... The government is always going to be enforcing someone's version of morality. There's no way around that. So the question is, do we have a just morality enforced, or do we have a unjust vision of morality enforced? And where do we get that standard from? And what you're going to find in King Jesus, the Messiah, the anointed one who's in charge of all earth, who commands everyone everywhere to obey him, is you're going to find the highest moral standards, but also immense love and mercy as well.
Right.
Absolutely. I mean, I think a lot of what's happening in the world regarding secularism, right? You're really seeing like polar opposites at play, okay, in a place like Iran. And, you know, I just saw this this woman who just got elected to be the prime minister of Italy, and she gave a speech, and it was really just like, they're calling her far right, but the more and more, and I don't know anything about her, but if I were to just take the words of that speech and say, they don't want me to be a woman, they don't want me to be a Christian, they don't want me to be a mother, they don't want me to have a female identity, you know, this pushback that happens against this kind of thing causes these extremes. And what's happening in the middle, and this is what happens in, you know, any kind of polarization, the extremes want to pull people to the side, right? They want to narrow the middle, and make it, you know, more and more just of like this kind of advancing forces that are eventually going to hit and, you know, fight each other. That's, you know, the nature of conflict. But in her case, I'm looking at it and I'm seeing it like, all right, the pushback against this is I'm going to cut my hair and I'm going to burn my hijab. And this woman is saying, well, as a Christian mom, I am going to stand up and exercise my rights in a different way. I think we have the same problem on both sides. And I think that we, you know, are looking at, if we were to part the veil and say, you know, the enemy is polarization and the answer is Jesus, right? So the enemy is like this thing, like you have to believe this really rigid set of things and employ them in a really rigid way. So I'm not saying that like, okay, I believe the Bible and I believe everything in the Bible, but the way that God teaches me to like live out the scripture is my own path, right? It's my own journey. I'm not saying that I get to sin, but I am saying that he deals with me individually when I sin. What these guys are doing and what's happening on the other side is trying to make templates for people, right? Cookie cutter people. You either are going to be a cookie cutter, you know, Muslim in Iran, or a cookie cutter progressive, you know, secularist.
And
Right.
and here's what they have in common. The root of all this evil is actually the belief that people are inherently good. So the
Just have kids.
so the Ayatollah in Iran, the Ayatollah in Iran believes that if you just create the perfect Islamic environment, then you will get peace, prosperity, human flourishing, and if you can just kind of create that environment through force, then eventually people will like it and be happy there. In France, they believe that secularism, once people have proper education, they will thrive and be prosperous and be happy and
No crime.
all that will be exactly.
No women killings.
So it's just an education problem. Both things have in common that, you know, these are external problems.
Yeah.
From the Christian perspective, evil does not start from out there in the world, it starts from within. So the society
No matter how perfect the society, evil is still going to happen because we are born with sin.
Right.
And we need something to push that sin away and back.
So let's say, let's say I, on the one hand, think that it's unnecessary for a woman to wear a head covering, and on the other hand, I think that, you know, the way people are dressing when they go to a club is like unhelpful, right? Let's say I have those two things on either side of me. Neither of those things is solved by me controlling how anyone else dresses.
No.
All of these things start in the heart, and there is no external measure I can apply that can transform someone's heart. That therefore, I want to act like Jesus, not using coercion, but using persuasion, focusing on the core issues of someone's life, not these, extra issues. Like, I don't believe in Islam. I don't think it's true, but I don't want to force Muslims to act like they're not Muslims.
Right.
And even if they stop being Muslims, I don't really have it. Like, a lot of these Afghan Christian women we have over here still wear, head coverings, and it's part of their culture. And it's not like I'm not in the mindset, oh, that's a problem, you've got to start.
Like France.
Yeah, it's like you're an American now. Let your hair
Wear
blow
a
in
cowboy
the wind.
hat.
Yeah.
And cowboy boots.
It's like, little bikinis from here on out. It's like,
With red, white, and blue.
yeah.
stripes.
Yeah.
Where did we just go?
I have a question.
Yeah.
To come back. We were talking about the way that ideologies play out in governments and societies and countries. So, question, so like, is there a different, like, because for Christians, right, we look at the Bible and we believe it 100%. And like you've been saying, like, oh, we emulate Jesus, yet we believe, and we believe, we take the Bible in its entirety. But the Bible, there are bad things that happen in the Bible, but it's not, we don't look at those things and say, let's do them again. In fact, the quite opposite. Like, the Bible is like this thorough story and explanation of like what has happened to humans, especially in the context of their relationship with God and like the results of that. In the
Okay, I have something right
Quran or Hadiths, like, is that also the case? Can we read those? Like, because I'm saying people should go read these things. And so if someone does, what are the assumptions that then, like, people can operate when reading, or any other scripture or text for that matter?
That's actually going to depend. That's actually going to be a big difference between Sunni Islam and Shia Islam.
Yeah.
So the Sunnis are going to read the actions of the Sahaba as kind of like the gold standard of human conduct.
Okay.
Whereas Shia are going to look at that and they're going to see flawed human beings doing flawed human things. However, there are going to be other characters such as Ali and his descendants, who the 12 Imams. So Iran is comprised of a 12-ish Shia ideology, hence these 12 like Imams throughout history, and they're going to look at them as the kind of like gold standard from for like the Sunnis would look at the Hadith sources.
Okay. I think that's just good awareness.
Yeah, and then people like Mohib, shout out Mohib, would actually take a more sort of critical eye to history, whether it be Western history or Islamic history, and want to learn history as well. So again, the Muslim approach to this is not monolithic by any means, but I do think that venerating of certain characters in certain parts does make it very difficult for people to learn from them. But we're choosing that too, right? We're seeing Jesus as the gold standard.
Yes.
And no one else as the kind of gold standard. And I think the actions of the apostles after Jesus' death, we see generally in an almost universally positive light, but not completely, because you have people like Peter who make mistakes in that.
Well, all of them make mistakes. But yeah, and we look at the Old Testament and the New Testament and we explain it through Jesus.
Not John. John got like a perfect report card.
John got a perfect report card? Okay.
The one Jesus loved the most.
Yeah.
Hashtag.
True. True.
But to your point, we don't actually believe John lived a perfect life.
No.
It's like we don't find it like an error, but like what he wrote as an apostle, we consider scripture. But we don't like try and emulate every part of his life. Same with Paul. Like we take Paul's words of scripture, but when he had a sharp disagreement over Barnabas about John Mark, for example, we don't say Paul was right or Barnabas was right, even though Barnabas is probably proved right in the long run. doesn't mean he was right in the moment. Like we don't know, right?
That's what I'm saying, that the Bible actually provides so much more explanation to human behavior throughout time.
I think it's important to understand, particularly on the first part of your question, like how do you look, and your question, how do you look and read into these things? I think one thing you can totally say is no moral police. Now, I know people would look at the Israelites and say, oh, well, they were being the moral police because they walked in there and they just pretty much slaughtered everybody, right? Again, God commanded them to do that. It wasn't like they just went in and did it. That was one of those instances in the scripture where God's like, you're going to do this. I'm going to tell you to do this, and this is the reason why you're going to do it.
Right.
And whether or not you think that's humane or whatever,
Take it up with God.
I don't like it. It
Yeah.
makes me uncomfortable, but I wasn't there, and I'm not God, right?
Right.
There are certain things I just have to yield back to him. But it didn't say, go in there, see how they live. If someone's doing this, you know, chop off their finger or something like that, right? Like it's a specific judgment against the people who are committing egregious sin, right? That's when God, you know, judges, when it's not redeemable. And the other part of it is, you know, let's look at it in terms of throughout history. Whenever we have like a state organization, right, or a religious organization whose job is to enforce what people do, like for instance in their bedrooms or you know, whatever, it never ends well.
No.
It just never does. So when you read these things, you have to kind of look at it and say, the moral police idea is not a good idea.
It's like, and I think what the secular people need to hear from us is those of us who take the Bible seriously can't stand those people. I mean, can you imagine having Christian morality police in the 90s?
Oh gosh.
This is CMPD! Put down the Pokemon cards! Put down the Pokemon cards!
Bro, when I was my mom was Muslim, and I was, you know, who I was, and she was like, you're listening to that rock and roll music. So she forced me to sit down and watch these Christian videos about how like all the backwards masking, that like, you know, they were hiding Satan's name and all of this stuff.
Wow.
My Muslim mother made me watch this like fundamental Christian thing, you know, to like get me to stop listening to like Metallica. like it was crazy.
And so I think that like fundamentally what we want as Christians, because again, I always say, our entire life we've been dealing with kind of wacky people who call themselves Christians who want to control people. We don't want those people in power. We don't want to see people who are just part of the Christian tribe, you know, controlling. A lot of people would be terrible at that. It's more a case we want to see just laws. We want to see righteous government. And we define righteous and justice through God's standards, not by man's standards. But I think anyone who kind of interacts with us is gonna find out that we love them. We sort of tolerate differences and sit down to with people we disagree with over food and have a good time, and can laugh and joke with people with completely different worldviews for us. And that's the kind of world that Bible-believing Christians should be building. Whether we have to push back against, and sometimes what we may be pushing back against is maybe it's radical Muslims who want to control people. Maybe it's secularists like in France who want to control people. Or maybe we're pushing back against Christians that want to control every aspect of people's.
I love this verse in 1 Peter. It's like it's always like a underpinning thing to my whole walk, because I don't know if you've picked this up about me since knowing me, but I tend to be like a roller coaster sometimes, you know. But it says, don't laugh. Keep yourselves in balance. Right? What does that even mean as a Christian? Well, I mean, I think it's what you just said, right? Like, too much righteousness is bad, and too little righteousness is bad, right? Like Paul talks about it, over focusing on study is bad. Under focusing on prayer is bad, right? But finding a balance in your spiritual life, like, okay, I read, I pray, I live the example, and then I start thinking about the world around me. You know what I mean? Like, I stay in union with God. So the idea of balance is important in our lives as followers.
So I think, to tie this all back into Iran specifically, I think there are a great many Christians now in Iran. Every new church I go to do kind of Al-Maida stuff, I meet somebody who's an Iranian Christian. I mean, sure, lots of people leaving the country, but there are a great number of Iranian Christians. And my hope is that these people become these people of balance and force for that in their country. That they're people who are tolerant and kind towards both the hardline Shia Muslims and the sort of many atheists and secularists who are in Iran as well. And because a lot of times when people suffer abuse and trauma, they get into power and turn around and do it again to the other people as well. That's how most revolutions work. And my hope is that Christians in Iran will be a force for moderation and balance and forgiveness and grace in the country, which I'm praying will go in a direction which is not clapped. It's not this kind of oppressive secular dictatorship which you often got in the Middle East, but would be one of tolerance and harmony.
Good point.
Yeah, I think that's actually a great point to wrap up the discussion, because that's obviously, we believe that Christianity would be a positive influence on the country of Iran, right? This is where you get out of balance, and you see this is what happens when there's a hardcore extremist Muslim government in place, because there are no other voices, right? But the one voice that that could cause that balance to happen between, right, and causes a positive change to happen in that country isn't secularism. It's the Christians, right? It's these people who are being suppressed by that government that that's the thing that God wants to grow. And I think that that's something we can all pray into, right? Out of all this chaos, that God would have his way, that God would reach down in the middle of these riots and reveal himself to people, that it would be a moment not just for secular government and the idea of Western principles to succeed, but a moment of liberation from these things where God's Spirit can break through what's happening in people's hearts and minds.
So to wrap up here, the New Testament tells us that we do not battle against flesh and blood, but principalities and powers in the heavenly realm. Mm-hmm. There's ideas and evil thoughts and evil ideologies to be overcome. But the average Muslim Iranian, the average secular Iranian, is not our enemy. Right? No individual is really our enemy. It's these sort of systems and principalities that we do war with. So it's really, really important for Christians, but I think especially Iranian Christians right now, to hold those two things in compartmentalization. And I think since most of them were Muslim within the last 20 years, I think they have a good shot of achieving that, because they have Muslim relatives and family that they know and love, and they know that the Iranian government does not represent every 12 Shia Muslim or every Muslim.
Right.
Well, guys, thank you for listening to this episode of Christ and Caliphate. We will be back next time.